Welcome to the League of Women Voters of Illinois Power the Vote chat room. In addition to providing informational opportunities such as this chat room, the LWVIL provides support to local leagues, including the Illinois Voter Guide and consistent messaging. Tonight, Jean Pierce and Ann Corder, League of Women Voters of Illinois issue specialists, will be answering your questions about the fair tax amendment that is on the ballot on November 3rd. Please note that we are recording this chat room and it will be available afterwards on the LWVIL website.
Hi, we hope you brought your questions and your ideas with you today. In order to participate, what we'd like you to do is use the Q&A button, which if you scroll over the bottom of your screen, you should find it the very right-hand icon. Put your questions in there, and then so our host may put in some links for you to access later on. Now I would like to introduce Jean Pierce, who's with the League of Women Voters Illinois. She's on the board of directors. She's the co-chair of issues and advocacy, and she's also with the League of Women Voters of Kane County, Central Kane County. And then our next host panelist is Ann Corder, who is with the League of Women Voters Illinois. She's an issues specialist for fiscal issues, and she's also a member of the League of Women Voters of Oak Park and River Forest. Ann also serves on the steering committee of the Vote Yes for Fair Tax Ballot Committee. One more point I want to bring up is we're going to hope to get to everyone's questions, but we will have a hard stop around 8 o'clock because there might be something else on the TV that you guys want to watch then. I'm not sure. So I'll turn it over to Jean and Ann.
Thank you very much, Pam. Okay, there we go. And all right. So yes, for the past 50 years, the League of Women Voters has supported having a graduated rate income tax for the state. And we believe that it's needed now more than ever. So tonight we're going to tell you why we think that. I got my ballot this week, and I wanted you to see where it is on my ballot. It's front and center, right here, the middle of the top of the middle column. So first it's in English and then it's in Spanish. We'll look at the exact wording later on. I just wanted you to be able to see, and what I don't know is whether other election authorities would have it in exactly the same place, but I sort of assumed that they would. So here's what we're talking about tonight. First of all, what's wrong with our current system? Then what is the fair tax? What will the fair tax do for us? And finally, how do we pass it? The League is part of a nonpartisan ballot committee made up of a diverse coalition of faith groups and educators, human service providers, unions, a variety. And we've been giving presentations like this one to help educate people throughout the state about the importance of a fair tax. I do need to tell you that this particular picture was taken prior to COVID. So let's talk about what's wrong with the current tax system. Basically, there's two major flaws. It's unfair and it's inadequate. It's unfair because it falls too heavily on the middle class and those struggling to get there. It's inadequate because it isn't raising enough money for us. It's caused budget deficits that have pushed up property taxes. It's forced cuts to schools, public services, and jobs. Now, ever since 1970, Illinois' Constitution has required all income taxpayers to pay the same rate, regardless of the family's income and ability to pay. So a family making $25,000 and a family making $25 million are paying at the same income tax rate. Because this is hardwired into the Constitution, we can't modernize our tax system so that it's responsive to the economic growth. So when we talk about economic growth, here's where it's been. Here's the top 1%. In the past 40 years, the top 1% has seen an increase in their income from 400,000 up to 1,400,000, close to 1,500,000. As opposed to the bottom 99%, they only saw an increase of 20%. This was 254% for the top 1%. And if we look at the bottom 90%, they actually saw an 8% decrease over that same 40 years. So we know that there's tremendous wealth inequality. And yet, look at what's happening with our state and local taxes combined. Now, when we say combined, we mean income tax, property tax, sales, excise, service, the whole 9 yards. So the point is, our lowest 20% of income earners, the group that is, 30% of them have lost their jobs during COVID, our lowest 20% of income earners are paying over 14% of their income in these combined state and local taxes, whereas our top 1% is just paying over 7% of their income in these combined state and local taxes. This doesn't make sense. To have a state economy that's based on the income of the lowest income earners as opposed to our wealthiest, when we've seen there's been a disproportionate increase in wealth over the past 40 years, is just crazy. So here's the impact that it's had on education. Our state is only paying 27% of the cost of education, as opposed to other states, on average, are paying 47% of the cost. Now, the feds pick up about 9%, but this leaves the local municipalities to pick up the rest of it. And what do they use? Property taxes. So that's why our property taxes are so high. They're paying 67% of the cost of, or 66% of the cost of public education. So about 2/3, as opposed to other states that are picking up 45% of the cost of public education by the local municipalities. So the problem is that our state is underfunding public education, and that's why we have this tremendous dependence on property taxes. Now, schools are not the only core services that are being underfunded. In the past 20 years, we have seen drastic cuts in spending to higher education. You know that we've had close to 50% cut in higher education. Healthcare, we've had over 18% cut. Human services, 15% cut. Public safety, 20% cut. The net is that for these core human services, we've seen a cut of over 20% in spending for the past 20 years. Now, this is in figures that have been adjusted for inflation and population. Now, there are two groups here which have seen an increase. K-12 education did see a small increase, 1.39%, which really came about since 2017, when the evidence-based funding model was passed, which the legislators promised to continually increase funding for education. Now, they stopped doing that this year because of COVID. If we get a graduated rate income tax in our Constitution, then they will be able to resume the evidence-based funding, and so that we will get more equitable funding for education. Early childhood has also seen a marked increase, but on the other hand, early childhood is a drop in the bucket compared to these other core services. Early childhood saw a tremendous increase, particularly when Governor Rauner was in office. His wife was in charge of ounce of prevention. And so they have, I mean, the good news is, yes, they've seen a large increase. The bad news is that even this is nowhere near what early childhood needs to be at. In addition, there's the environment. When we look at funding for the Illinois EPA, and we look at the people who have been hired, they've had a 50% cut in the number of people hired by the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency since 2003. What does this mean? This means that the pollution is not being monitored nearly as effectively as it should be for air, for water, for the ground. Serious cuts in personnel means serious cuts in services. So let's pause here and take some questions about what's wrong with the current situation. Barb, do you have some questions for us?
Yes, the first question is, what is the better tax structure and why? You've kind of gone over that and answered it. What is the better tax structure and why?
Okay. Yeah, we did talk about that, but what we didn't mention is that in where we stand, the league 40 years ago came up with a position for fiscal policy, which states that income taxes should be progressive and responsive. So that means they should be based on the ability to pay to a state revenue system. So, and it should be it should be responsive, because it needs to be able to capture and reflect long-term economic growth. And so we've seen that currently with the flat tax, it's neither. It isn't considering the fact that the only economic growth has been among the top income earners, and it's not asking them to pay their fair share, and it's not progressive. So it's violating our standards, and so, you know, as I say, this is a long held position by the League of Women Voters of Illinois. We're not just suddenly jumping on the bandwagon.
And Jean, there's an additional factor here, that the flat tax exacerbates income inequality, and it exacerbates the racial wealth gap in Illinois. There was a new study by the Institute of Tax and Economic Policy that showed that because low income earners tend to be Black and Latinx, that having the unfair burden placed on the lower and middle income earners lets the more wealthy white, predominantly earners at the top of the income scale, basically affect a transfer of wealth out of the lower and middle income families into the rich white families. And they calculated that it amounted to $4 billion over a number of years, and it really should not be allowed to stand. If we are in the wake of George Floyd and the recent resurgence in concern about racial inequality, this is a very timely way that we can address those disparities by moving to a graduated tax structure that will allow us to tax higher income families at higher rates, as they are in many, many other states.
We'll be talking about the rate structure later on. And what Anna's alluding to is, if that rate structure had been in place since 1999, then Blacks and Latinos would have saved $4 billion over that time period. So it just doesn't make sense the way our current structure is.
The other point that I think is worth pointing out is that an income tax is naturally progressive, but our flat rate tax is not very progressive. It's just a little bit progressive, so that families who make 25 million do in fact pay higher taxes under the current structure than a family that makes 25,000. But the only tool that a state has to make its overall tax structure progressive, including your property taxes and your sales taxes and all of the other taxes that we pay, the only way to really make the whole thing progressive is with a graduated rate income tax. The income tax is the only tax that can be made progressive, and it needs to be made more progressive than it currently is today in order to make our whole system fair.
One more
Barbara,
question is, how has the pandemic affected the need or the discussion regarding the fair tax?
well, as I said, we're saying it's needed now more than ever. The pandemic has accentuated the haves versus the have-nots. Because of the pandemic, so many people are out of work. One way to collect, we're going to be talking about that with the fair tax, we anticipate $3 billion coming in. If the fair tax doesn't pass, the chances are very good that the flat tax would be increased. In order to try to get $3 billion, that means our flat tax would go from 4.95% to 5.95% on everyone. You know, you can't get blood from a stone. That it's ridiculous to overburden our middle and lower income earners who have been hit so hard by the pandemic.
And it also goes to racial equity again, because as we all know, COVID has hit minority populations much harder. And those are the folks who especially need government services right now. And to the extent that we are not providing adequate services in low-income communities, the COVID situation, whether it's due to health disparities, the lack of adequate health provision, the lack of adequate food resources in those communities, adequate nutrition. There's many possible causes for why Black and Latinx communities have been hit most hard by the COVID crisis. And many of them are in lower earning jobs and need to go to work. They can't stay home and do Zoom like some of us are able to do. So particularly now, we need a more fair tax structure to take the burden off of those families who really can't afford to pay anymore, and to be able to have sufficient revenue to provide services in those underserved communities.
Thank you. I just want to remind everybody to use the Q&A if they have any further questions, but those are all the questions I have for now, Jean.
Thank you. Okay, so what I'd like you to look at over here on the right is a partial list of many of the services that are provided by the state. They provide funding for schools, for public health, for roads, mental health, public transit, prisons, domestic violence, and so on and so forth. What we're encouraging people to do is to come up with a personal story about how the current lack of funding has impacted you or your friends. How has the current flat tax impaired the ability to function of our citizens? So here's my story. I have a 6-year-old grandson who is hearing impaired. And by the time that he's an adult, he's going to be fully deaf. So the education that he gets at this particular time in his life is incredibly important. And yet he lives in a school district that has only 60% adequate funding. And so unless the state begins paying more of its share for public education, he cannot get the level of education that he needs at this crucial time in his life. So I'm sure that many of you have similar stories, or you know of family or friends who have been impacted by cutbacks in services, by environmental cutbacks, and so on. So when you think of those, that can be very powerful to share with people when you're talking with them about why the current system is not working and we need a graduated rate income tax. So let's talk about what the fair tax is. This is not some bizarre new concept. A majority of our states already use a fair tax system, 32 of them in fact, including a majority of our neighbor states. The federal government uses a fair tax system. In fact, we are one of only 4 states to mandate a flat tax in our state constitution. That's the problem. So here's what you'll see when you get your ballot or when you go to the polling place. It's titled Proposed Amendment to the 1970 Illinois Constitution. And the most important part is this highlighted sentence. The amendment would remove the portion of the revenue article of the Illinois Constitution that is sometimes referred to as a flat tax, that requires all taxes on income to be at the same rate. Now, you'll notice that you are not voting on the rates. The General Assembly has already set the rates. We'll talk about those later. And you are not removing the possibility of a flat tax. In the future, if our economy changes and there is some reason, now the league doesn't really think there would be likely to be a reason, but in the future, if the General Assembly decides, they could still impose a flat tax. This is giving them the ability to either use a flat tax or a graduated rate income tax that would be more responsive to where the only economic growth has been. And of course, we want people to vote yes. So what will it mean for us? It means tax fairness. 97% of the people in Illinois will see no income tax increase. A majority of middle and lower income families are actually going to receive a tax cut. Only people earning more than $250,000 a year will pay more. Now here are the tax brackets. This is the rate structure that was passed over a year ago by the General Assembly, and it's passed contingent on the people approving the fair tax amendment. So just like for the federal IRS, you have different income brackets and different rates. For the first $10,000 that you earn, that will be taxed at a rate of 4.75%. For the first dollar you earn over 10,000 on up to 100,000, that will be taxed at a rate of 4.90%. For the first dollar after that, up to 250, that'll be taxed at the current rate, which is 4.95%. Now, after you get over $250,000 for both single payers or joint filers, then you will start to see a tax increase. So for the first dollar that you make over $250,000, that will be taxed at a rate of 7.75%. On up to 350,000 for single, on up to 500,000 for joint. Now, when we go to the top bracket here, if you're a single filer and you're making more than $750,000, or if you're filing jointly and you're making more than $1 million a year, that whole amount would be taxed at this rate of 7.99%. So in a sense, it's a flat rate for the top 0.3% of income earners in the state. So the increase in rates only applies to 3% of our income earners. In addition to the rates, the same bill expands the property tax credit from 5% to 6% and implements a child tax credit up to $100 per child up to age 17 for families earning $100,000 or less. You can find out how the fair tax would affect your family if you go to bit.ly/FIT Fair Income Tax Calculator. bit.ly Fair Income Tax Calculator, FIT calculator. So enter the basic parameters for your family and you will find the effect. Here's how it compares to our neighboring states for the impact on the middle class. This is our current flat 4.95% tax. Here's what it will look like for the middle class when we have a new rate structure when people approve the fair income tax for Illinois. Here is Missouri. So you see basically for the middle class, Missouri is taxing their middle class at a higher rate than in Illinois. Now here's Kentucky. You can hardly see Kentucky. They have a flat tax and it's 5%. So it's pretty much on top of Illinois. Here's Indiana. Now Indiana does have a flat tax, but Indiana actually has 2 income taxes. For all except one of their counties also have an income tax. So if you live in Indianapolis, you're in Marion County, and you're paying an income tax to the state of Indiana and also to Marion County. So if you're in Indianapolis, you're paying a higher combined income tax than people in Chicago. Here's Wisconsin, and here's Iowa. So even with our increased rates with the fair tax, our middle class is going to be lower than our surrounding states. And yet it's going to bring in $3 billion in additional funding to our communities for education, for jobs, for public safety, for human services, and for healthcare. So, Barbara, are there questions now regarding the impact of the tax?
Oh, yes, there are. Anne would like to know, as would the rest of us, I'm sure, what are the arguments being made by those who are against the fair tax? It seems it's hard to understand.
Why don't we hold on to that one, because I'm guessing that many of the other questions will probably bring out those arguments. If there are some that we don't touch on, then we'll be sure to come back to that one. Yeah, let's keep that one in reserve for later.
Okay. Next question. How can we be sure that people will not leave Illinois at a huge rate?
Okay. The research shows that this is not likely to happen, that the wealthiest have made their money here. They've got their thriving businesses. When they move because of the weather, they move because of family. They typically don't move because of income taxes. When they do move, many of them move to New York or to California, and they actually would be paying a higher percentage of their income in income taxes if they go to those states. So the chances are that no, we're not going to lose our wealthiest because of this. Now, you know, will a few of them move? Yeah, they might. But as I say, if you have a business which is working, then and now you have people who are happy and can purchase the goods that you're selling. You have better services, better core services for your employees and your customers. You want to stick around.
Cranes actually did a pretty comprehensive study published in the last week, looking at all the research about whether the wealthy would be likely to move. They looked at states that instituted a millionaire's tax where they didn't have one prior to that. And what they found, projecting, looking at our tax structure and the change that we would experience, is that there might be a few ultra wealthy folks who would leave, but on balance, the additional tax revenue that we would gain by raising those rates on the wealthy 3% would offset any of the losses from a few people leaving. And on balance, we would not see an exodus. And as far as the 97% of people who are not going to be paying higher taxes and may actually see a tax cut, there's no reason that this change would drive them away. It would induce them actually to stay and see that tax cut.
One thing that came out in the Cranes article was that the tax structure that we're going to is similar to what happened in New Jersey, and millionaires did not desert New Jersey when they had a tax similar to what we're talking about.
Thank you. Rosemary is asking and stating, I've seen negative ads saying this change will give the legislature the ability to tax retiree income. Don't they have the ability now anyway?
Yes, they do. They have not wanted to tax retirement income, and in fact, the AARP is a strong endorser of the fair tax. They published brochures saying that they are convinced that having a fair tax is going to actually protect retirement security. That because the state will be bringing in increased revenue, there will be less chance to have an increase or to begin taxing retirement income. So it's exactly the opposite of what the fearmongers are saying.
You know, there's a TV ad with an elderly woman who is practically in tears because she thinks she'll have to leave. I don't know who's been telling her what story, but her retirement tax, her retirement income is safer if the fair tax passes. So somebody should let her know.
Next question. Will small business be hurt by the fair tax?
And I'll let you take that one.
No, there's 1.2 million small businesses in Illinois, and most are mom and pop shops. Some are partnerships, some are S corporations, which still have a small number of employees, but file under subchapter S of the Internal Revenue Code. All of those kinds of small businesses pay their taxes through the individual returns of the owner. They don't pay a separate business tax. They pay through the owner's individual income tax. So when you're looking at 97% of taxpayers will not see an increase, that includes those small businesses also, because if they're not making profits above $250,000, they will not see a tax increase. Large corporations will have an increase in their tax rate. They pay a flat tax rate under the.
Oops, and your sound went out. There you go.
Is it back?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I need a new computer. Okay. Yeah, so currently corporations that pay 7%, then under the new proposed rates, they'll go to 7.99%. So large C corporations, which do pay business taxes, will see a small increase in their taxes. But there are no studies that show that large corporations stay or go in a state based on their income tax rates. Income taxes are a very small part of their business expenses. Property taxes are a bigger deal for them. So the idea that this will force large corporations out of the state by raising their taxes less than 1% is fallacious. And as far as small businesses being hurt, The only small businesses that will pay more are those who are making a lot of money. If they're making, say, $300,000 in profit, they will only pay a higher rate on the extra 50,000 above 250. So it will be a small percentage increase. I've seen some flyers that show that 100,000 small businesses will pay 47% higher taxes. That's completely false. At most, I think the very, very most number of businesses making anywhere near the $1 million rate in profits, maybe 19,000, absolute top. And they will pay an increased tax. Will be more comparable to what they would pay if they lived in other states like Minnesota, Oregon, New York, New Jersey, California. If they lived in those places, they would be paying an even higher rate than what is being proposed. So their rates will go up for that's relatively small number of businesses, but the 1.2 million businesses in Illinois will not be impacted negatively by the fair tax, and they may in fact be helped.
And this applies to farms as well. We frankly cannot figure out why the Farm Bureau has come out against the fair tax, because when Ann talks about small businesses, you could substitute farms in there just as easily. And I know my family has a farm, which is an S corporation. And when you look at the profits that any one owner of that corporation is making, believe me, it's nowhere near $250,000 in profits.
We do have one additional question, but I don't know if you want to answer it now or when you deal with the arguments against. The question is, who's paying for all the opposition TV ads?
Well, basically it's the battle of the billionaires. Pritzker's money is paying for the ads in favor. The ads against are funded in large part by former Governor Rauner, the remaining Koch brother, Ken Griffin. So it's, you know, you're one thing I like to mention about the ads is, in a sense, I feel sorry for the opposition, because their task is to try to convince 97% of the people to vote against their best interest. How do you do that? Okay, the way to do that is through fear mongering, through distortion of facts, through finding data which is misrepresenting the picture, and so yeah, that's what basically, in a nutshell, what's happening.
And do you have any further comments?
It's people who don't want to pay more, and since it's really only the wealthy, the folks who are making close to $1 million who are being asked to pay any substantial amount more, that those who are, they've made a calculation that they'll save money if they can defeat this. Yeah.
But what they're saying, they're trying to appeal to middle and lower class earners, lower income earners, I should say. And their argument totally falls down when they do that. Yeah. It really is only going to impact on the top 3% of income earners.
Yeah, another argument against is that because of the COVID crisis and a possible recession, that the economy is faltering, and this is the worst possible time to raise taxes. I've heard that. In fact, there was an op-ed in the New York Times last week by a Nobel Prize winning economist, Stiglitz, who said that this is the exact correct time to be raising taxes on those who can afford to pay them, because that will make it possible to keep our state workers employed, throwing them out of work will really put a damper on the economy. We don't want money to not be available to spend at local businesses to keep things flowing along. It would be a mistake to tax everybody, as we would have to do if we have a flat tax. That could be a damper on the economy. But if we can get the graduated rate structure passed and are able to tax only those at the very top, that will help the economy. It will keep people employed. It will keep services operating to help those who are in need. And this is absolutely the best plan possible. It was put on the ballot before we knew this would happen, but it turns out that this is a really good time for this to take place.
Another concern that has been raised is, shouldn't you fix X, Y, and Z before considering changing the tax structure? That and the most common thing that is filled in the blank is shouldn't we fix the pension first? But there are all kinds of other delay tactics that people will fill in the blank there with. And our response is, this is an essential first step that needs to be taken. We have waited over 50 years for this. We are closer now than ever before to getting this done. Our state desperately needs more revenue. It's going to take a long time to fix the pension ramp, frankly. There are ideas of things that should be done. They should re-amortize the pension, such as Ralph Martiri suggests. There are other solutions like that that also need to be tackled. But we're not focused on the pensions right now. We're focused on why we need a fair tax. And as Ann said, this is the best time to do it, now more than ever.
There was an article in Cranes Today, came out in the afternoon, saying that the Civic Committee of the Commercial Club has decided to oppose the fair tax. I got an email from a friend who was surprised by that, but I'm not so surprised. The rationale that they gave for not supporting this, even though a year ago they were supporting the idea of a graduated rate tax, they're saying that there needs to be more of a shared burden, is what they're saying, which I think can be translated to we need to squeeze the unions a little harder, get concessions so that they give up some of their constitutionally protected guarantees. And until we can do that, we're not going to do what in the past we have said is actually a better policy and better for the state. So, you know, you can figure out how you feel about that and read the article yourselves. But that I think explains some of the opposition, is that it's not taking place in a vacuum. We're not creating good tax policy in a vacuum. We've got a history of struggles between the corporate world and the unions, and that's still playing out today in this particular constitutional amendment. And meanwhile, the state of Illinois is in a world of hurt and sinking rapidly. And I would say this isn't the time to play those high stakes games. We need to fix the problem. We need to get revenue in the door. We need to bolster our economy, and we need to make sure that we aren't putting people out of work. I think the League's position would be that we need to proceed with this. We've been working for it for 50 years. It's on the ballot. It was obviously not easy to get it there, since this is the first time in 50 years it's been there. And we can't just say, oh, well, next time we'll vote yes. There may not be a next time for a very long time. So we need to vote yes now. We need to work on consolidation of governments. We need to work on reforming the pension ramp. We need to do all of those things, but the league especially is able to walk and chew gum at the same time. And we are working hard on consolidation. We are working hard on remap. We are working hard on many of these things that people want to have happen first. But the league says this is the time to do this now, and we will also continue working on these other reforms.
So Anne alluded to what is needed, and so what I'd like to do is go through this part of the presentation, and then we'll take remaining questions. So what we really need is either 50% of those voting in the elections to vote yes, or 60%, over 60% of those voting on the question. So supposing you have 200 people voting in the election, and you have 100 people voting on the question, and 61 of the people voting on the question vote yes. You would not have more than 50% of those voting in the election, but you would have more than 60% of those voting on the question. Currently, it's polling right close to 60%. So we really, really, really need each and every one of you to vote yes and to talk with your family and friends and encourage them to support this as well. So as we said, talk with your friends and neighbors, sign on as an endorser. The endorsers would have their names used in an ad, which would say, hey, here's your neighbor who supports this. They think it's a good idea, you should too. Join us in educating target voters. Spread the word on social media. Write a letter to the editor. Request a yard sign. Now the league has already handed out over 1,000 yard signs. It would be possible to request more for your area. Another thing that we're asking people to do is to come up with an elevator speech. And this would last about 30 seconds, meaning about 60 to 70 words, be free of jargon, describe the need and consequences and what you want people to do. So here's my elevator speech. Our best hope of funding programs that address problems highlighted during the COVID crisis is a fair tax. This would raise taxes on the only segment of society that has seen an increase in income in recent decades, people earning over $250,000. That's why I'm voting for the fair tax, and I hope you do too. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we can address other questions that people have.
I have one question that people have asked is, are there resources available on the league website for people to use in their messaging?
Yes, there are. And in fact, I could show you how to get there. Okay. So when you go to LWVIL.org, you'll be greeted by this home page. It's a very attractive, it's a new website. We encourage everyone to visit it. It really looks spectacular. So you scroll down and you'll see Vote Yes for Fair Tax. And it says, find out why the league supports a graduated income tax and the amendment. Check out the action toolkit. So click on that and you will find a whole bunch of things for you to pursue individually. There's a 1-minute video. You could share that on Facebook. You could, your league could get involved. We have practically all of the leagues meeting with us every other week and passionately working to support this. And then we have a whole bunch of resources down at the bottom, one in Spanish, one in American Sign Language. We have one that Ralph Martiri presented recently, and so on and so forth. So please do check that out. There are a lot of resources. And if you find that you want something else, then contact me. You could send an email to issues@lwvil.org.
There is a Faith Week effort, and on Thursday, well, actually tomorrow, there is a really nice panel discussion showing the diversity of the faith support for the fair tax. On Thursday, there's a rally with, I think, 11 dynamic speakers who will be talking about why they, as clergy, Jewish, Muslim, Protestant, Catholic, all support the fair tax because they see it as an issue of social justice, and because their scripture, their foundational text calls them to help those most in need, and they see that the fair tax is the best way to do that. So it's at 4 o'clock on Thursday. If you go to the it's yesforfairtax.org/faith, FAITH. You will be able to register for all of those events. And on Friday, we will have our organizer available all day to help you text message or join a phone bank. It doesn't have to be faith related. It can just help you get hooked into the way that we are doing campaigning in the age of COVID with text messaging. There's some really cool little devices that can use, and phone banking and letters to the editor, anything you want. Jesse Rojo will help you. He's great. And then on Sunday, we're hoping that everybody preaches about the fair tax, and we're putting together a video to roll that out. So I urge you to visit that page.
Thank you. Thank you both, Jean and Ann, so much. Now, if anyone after this is over and a question comes to mind, they certainly can reach out to you by email and get more information, or if they didn't get one of the websites addresses down and find out about those events, they can just contact you.
Right, I just put issues@lwvil.org in the chat.
Great.
And we're happy to do more speaking too. If you'd like us to come and talk to your block club or your whatever group you're doing Zoom with, we'd be happy to be there and answer questions.
Thank you. Well, I think we're going to wrap up just a little bit early, but I just want to thank Michelle Thorsell, who's been behind the scenes, and Barb, who did such a good job of moderating, and Jean and Ann, thank you. This was so informative and helpful, and I think will make us all be better advocates for the fair tax, since it's been so prominent in the news. So thank you again, and
thank you for inviting us.
Yes. Very
I
happy.
think this will be a recording of this will be on the League YouTube channel in the coming days.
Great.
So, all right. Thank you. Good
Thank
night,
you.
everyone.
Night.